The wine was already falling before Rachel Lynn understood it had been thrown on purpose. It hit her chest in a dark red sheet, soaking through her white uniform shirt in seconds, the smell of Cabernet and crushed grapes rising sharply around her as gasps and laughter erupted from the table behind her. Madison Cole sat at the center of it, champagne flute still raised in her other hand, her face arranged into an expression of theatrical apology that fooled exactly no one in earshot. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Madison said, loud enough to carry across half the dining room, her friends already lifting their phones, screens glowing in the restaurant's low golden light. "I totally tripped. Did you guys get that? Tell me you got that." Rachel stood frozen between two tables, a tray of empty glasses trembling slightly in her hands, the wine cooling fast against her skin under the restaurant's warm lighting. Around her, Marchetti's dining room hummed with its usual evening soundtrack. Low jazz drifting from hidden speakers, the clink of silverware against porcelain, the distant hiss of the kitchen's grill, all of it suddenly very loud against the silence pressing in around her own table. "You good, sweetie?" one of Madison's friends called out, not bothering to hide her smirk as she angled her phone for a better shot. "Don't worry, we'll tag you. You're basically famous now." Rachel had absorbed 2 years of casual cruelty in this dining room without raising her voice once. The comments about her size murmured just loud enough to be overheard, the snapped fingers demanding refills like she was furniture with legs, the tips withheld specifically to make a point about which employees deserved generosity and which didn't. She had built an entire career on the particular exhausting discipline of staying calm no matter what wealthy guests decided to throw at her, literally or otherwise. She set the tray down with hands that refused to stop shaking, the Cabernet already staining permanently into the white cotton, and opened her mouth to say something professional and deflecting, the kind of line she'd rehearsed 100 times for exactly this category of humiliation. She never got the chance. Above the dining floor, behind the one-way glass of the private booth that overlooked the entire restaurant, Vincent Marchetti had been watching the table for the last 10 minutes, and he set down his glass the moment the wine left Madison's hand. The dining room didn't know he was there. Vincent rarely appeared on the floor during service, a fact the staff had long since stopped questioning, content to run the restaurant under his quiet, absentee ownership without ever needing his personal involvement. So when the private booth's door opened and Vincent Marchetti walked down the back staircase himself, crossing the dining floor with unhurried, deliberate steps, conversation died table by table in a wave that moved faster than any announcement could have managed. He stopped directly behind Madison's chair. "Apologize," he said. "On your knees." The words landed into a silence so complete that the kitchen's distant clatter suddenly felt deafening. Madison turned, phone still raised, her laugh dying somewhere in her throat as she registered the man standing over her table. Tall, unhurried, dressed in a charcoal suit that belonged to someone considerably more dangerous than a restaurant owner checking on service complaints. "I'm sorry, what?" Madison said, laughing nervously, glancing at her friends for backup that didn't arrive. Is this a joke? Do you know who my father is?" "I know exactly who your father is," Vincent said. "Councilman Robert Cole. And I know precisely what you just did to my employee, in front of 2 cameras you clearly intended to use against her, which tells me this wasn't an accident at all." Madison's friends had stopped filming, phones lowering slowly as the air in the room shifted from amused entitlement into something considerably colder. 2 of Vincent's security staff had quietly positioned themselves near the dining room's main exits, not blocking them outright, but present enough that the message landed regardless. "This is insane," Madison said, color rising in her cheeks. "It was wine. It's a uniform. Nobody died." "You're right," Vincent said. "Nobody died tonight. But I've watched what happens when people decide it's acceptable to humiliate someone for entertainment, and I am not interested in letting that happen in my restaurant twice." Rachel stood several feet away, wine-soaked and utterly bewildered, watching the most powerful man in this part of the city demand an apology on her behalf with a precision that suggested this had nothing to do with the wine at all. She had worked for Vincent Marchetti for 2 years and had exchanged maybe a dozen sentences with him in that entire time. She had certainly never expected him to descend from a private booth and bring an entire dining room to a standstill over a ruined uniform shirt. "I don't need her to apologize," Rachel said quietly, the words surprising her as much as anyone. "I just need to go change before the stain sets." Vincent's expression shifted slightly as he looked at her. Not softening exactly but recalibrating, the way a man recalibrates when someone says something he hadn't expected to hear. "You'll get your apology either way," he said. "But you're right that it shouldn't take this long to get one." Madison, sensing the room's attention sliding entirely against her, finally slid out of her chair, knees touching the floor with visible fury beneath the forced compliance, the camera-ready performance of moments earlier replaced by genuine, humiliated panic. "I'm sorry," she said, the words clipped and venomous. "Happy now?" "Not particularly," Vincent said. "But it's a start." Nobody in that dining room, not Madison, not her friends, not Rachel herself, yet understood that the wine had never really been about Rachel at all. It had been the opening move in a war Madison's father had been quietly waging against Vincent Marchetti for months, and Rachel Lynn had just become, by complete accident, the most valuable and most endangered piece on the entire board. Rachel Lynn had perfected the art of staying invisible long before Madison Cole ever gave her a reason to want it. She'd worked the floor at Marchetti's for 2 years. Taking the job after culinary school left her with debt and no kitchen, willing to hire someone they considered too soft for the physical demands of a real line. A judgment she'd absorbed quietly the way she absorbed most things, filing it away rather than fighting it, because fighting it had never once changed anyone's mind in her experience. Waiting tables paid the bills. It also taught her, more thoroughly than culinary school ever had, exactly how cruel wealthy people could be to someone serving their dinner. She'd developed a habit somewhere in her first 6 months of writing things down. Not complaints, not grievances, just facts. Dates. Names. The night the walk-in cooler's temperature gauge read 4 degrees too warm for 3 straight days before anyone fixed it. The shift the fire exit near the kitchen got blocked by a delivery pallet for 2 weeks because nobody wanted to deal with the vendor. The time a server got food poisoning from undercooked chicken that management quietly attributed to personal illness, rather than admit the walk-in had been malfunctioning again. She kept the notes in a small spiral notebook tucked into her apron pocket, alongside a recipe card from her grandmother, handwritten instructions for dumplings that Rachel had never once made exactly right, kept anyway because it was the only thing of her grandmother's she still carried daily. She'd never told anyone about the notebook. She'd certainly never imagined it would matter to anyone beyond her own quiet, persistent unease about working in a building where safety violations seemed to be a permanent feature of doing business. "You okay?" her coworker Theo asked, finding her in the staff bathroom 20 minutes after the incident, scrubbing uselessly at the wine stain with a wet paper towel. "That was insane. He's never come down to the floor like that. Not once in the whole time I've worked here." "I don't know what just happened," Rachel admitted. "I don't know why he cared. Maybe he's just decent," Theo said. "Or maybe Madison Cole's dad finally pushed too hard." "What do you mean?" Theo hesitated, glancing toward the door before lowering his voice. "There's been talk. Councilman Cole's been trying to pull Marchetti's liquor license for months over some financial dispute nobody downstairs really understands. Word is he's been looking for any excuse to make this place look bad publicly. Maybe his daughter decided to manufacture one." It would have been easy, in another version of this night, for Rachel to simply finish her shift in her backup uniform and go home to cry quietly about the humiliation the way she'd cried about smaller cruelties before. Instead, the restaurant's general manager, Gary Voss, found her near the service hallway minutes later, his expression carrying none of the concern she might have expected. "You need to let this go," Gary said, voice low. "Don't make a bigger deal out of this than it already is. The Coles are powerful people, and Mr. Marchetti's temper isn't going to protect your job if this turns into something he can't control." "I didn't ask him to do anything," Rachel said. "I just got wine dumped on me." "I know," Gary said, though something in his tone struck her even then as not entirely convincing. "Just keep your head down. Things go easier for everyone when people keep their heads down." It wasn't a dramatic reversal. Nobody applauded her refusal to simply nod along. But Rachel found herself, for the first time in 2 years, deciding not to take Gary's advice at face value, and that small, quiet decision turned out to matter considerably more than either of them understood that night. Vincent found her 20 minutes later in the back hallway, having changed into a spare uniform shirt that didn't quite fit, the wine-stained one balled into a plastic bag she intended to take home and probably never wear again. "You handled that better than most people would have," he said. "I didn't handle anything," Rachel said. "You handled it." "I made her apologize," Vincent said. You're the one who's been absorbing 2 years of exactly that kind of treatment without anyone noticing until tonight. I'd like to understand how you've managed that. Rachel considered him for a long moment, weighing how much honesty this strange, sudden attention actually deserved. You notice things you're not supposed to notice when you're invisible, she said finally. It's the only thing being overlooked is actually good for. Something behind Vincent's eyes sharpened with interest that had nothing to do with the wine at all. Vincent Marchetti did not make a habit of personally investigating his employees, and the fact that he found himself doing exactly that within an hour of the wine incident told him, with uncomfortable clarity, that tonight had unsettled something he'd kept carefully buried for years. He'd built Marchetti's into more than a restaurant, a legitimate front for an organization that controlled significant portions of Fulton Square's import trade, the dining room itself serving as a kind of neutral ground where deals got made over wine lists nobody outside his circle understood the real purpose of. He ran it with absolute intolerance for cruelty toward his staff, a policy every employee understood without ever being told the reason behind it directly. The reason sat 15 years deep in a different restaurant in a dining room not unlike this one. His younger sister Sophia had worked the floor there at 19, humiliated repeatedly by a table of wealthy regulars who treated her exactly the way Madison Cole had just treated Rachel, as entertainment rather than a person. The restaurant's owner had done nothing. Sophia had quit, spiraled, and 18 months later, in circumstances Vincent had spent years trying not to revisit in detail, she was gone entirely. He had built Marchetti's in part as a monument to the protection he hadn't been able to offer her in time. Tonight had cracked that old wound open in a way he hadn't expected, and standing in his office reviewing personnel files at nearly midnight, he found himself considerably more interested in Rachel Lynn's quiet competence than the wine incident alone explained. Pull everything we have on the health and safety logs for the last 6 months, he told his head of security, Dario, the following morning. I want to know what's actually been happening in that kitchen that management hasn't reported up to me. Dario returned within the day with considerably less than Vincent expected. Official logs showing nothing unusual, every inspection passed, every incident report conveniently absent from the file. Either we run a remarkably clean kitchen, Dario said, or someone's been keeping the real reports from reaching you. Vincent thought of Gary Voss's nervous deflection the night before, the careful way he'd steered Rachel away from making a scene, and felt the same instinct that had once warned him about danger on the dock settle uncomfortably into his stomach. He found Rachel on the floor 2 days later, between the lunch rush and evening service, restocking silverware with the same unhurried precision he'd noticed the night of the wine. You keep a notebook, he said. Theo mentioned it. Said you write things down. Dates, incidents, things that go wrong in this building that nobody upstairs hears about. Rachel's hands stilled on the silverware tray. It's not anything official. Just notes I keep for myself. I'd like to see it. Why? Because someone in my own management has been hiding safety violations from me for months, and I think you might have documented exactly what they've been covering up, Vincent said. I'm not asking you to get anyone fired. I'm asking because I think you might have noticed something that matters considerably more than either of us realized until recently. Rachel hesitated, the careful instinct of someone who'd learned the hard way that information shared with management rarely came back to help the person who'd shared it. If I show you this, she said slowly, and it turns into some kind of investigation, I lose my job either way. Gary will make sure of that even if you don't intend it. I won't let that happen, Vincent said. You can't promise that, Rachel said. Not really. You can promise to try. It was a small refusal, but Vincent recognized it immediately for what it was. The first person in years who'd pushed back against his certainty rather than simply deferring to it, and the recognition landed somewhere considerably more personal than he expected. You're right, he said. I can't promise outcomes I don't control. I can promise you won't face whatever comes next alone. That evening, at a tense sit-down with 2 captains from the Dunmore crew, a smaller outfit that had spent years testing whether Vincent's organization had grown distracted enough along the docks to challenge, Vincent found his attention dividing in a way it hadn't in years, half the negotiation devoted to shipping percentages, the other half occupied by the quiet, persistent question of exactly how deep Gary Voss's betrayal actually ran. He ended the meeting earlier than planned and found himself, against every careful instinct 15 years of running an organization had built into him, walking back toward the restaurant instead of home, The connection between them deepened over the following week in careful, unhurried conversations that both of them initially framed as business, neither of them particularly convincing about it by the fourth or fifth evening. Vincent started staying later most nights, ostensibly reviewing the notebook Rachel had finally agreed to share, though the conversations stretched well past whatever the investigation required. The kitchen, empty after closing, smelled of garlic and char from the night's last service. A single radio in the corner tuned low to a station nobody had chosen on purpose. Rain against the alley windows, the only other sound in the building. He told her in careful pieces about Sophia. Not all of it, not at first, but enough that Rachel understood, with a clarity that startled her, exactly why a wine stain had pulled the city's most feared restaurant owner down from a private booth. "I couldn't protect her," Vincent said one night, the admission rougher than anything she'd heard from him yet. "I've spent 15 years making sure nobody who works for me ever has to feel that powerless in a dining room again. I didn't expect tonight to feel quite this personal." "It's not your fault," Rachel said. "What happened to her?" "I know that intellectually," Vincent said. "I'm not sure I've ever actually believed it." Rachel found herself, against every careful instinct she'd built over 2 years of staying invisible, telling him about culinary school instead. The dream of running her own kitchen someday, the recipe card from her grandmother she still hadn't managed to perfect, the particular indignity of being told by 3 separate head chefs that she didn't have the right look, 4-line work even when her technique outpaced candidates twice her size. "You should be cooking somewhere, not serving wine to people who throw it on you," Vincent said. "Maybe," Rachel said. "Or maybe I notice things from this side of the kitchen that I wouldn't notice from the line. I don't know yet which version of my life is the right one." When Vincent offered several days later to simply have his lawyers quietly settle whatever consequences Rachel might face for handing over her notebook, covering any lost wages, guaranteeing her position regardless of what Gary Voss tried, Rachel shook her head. "I don't want it handled before I decide what I'm actually willing to risk," she said. "If you smooth this over before I've made a real choice, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if any of it was actually mine to decide. Let me choose. Don't choose it for me." Vincent studied her for a long moment, recalibrating, the way he kept finding himself recalibrating around her. "All right," he said. "You choose. I'll support whatever you decide." Gary Voss cornered her 2 days later in the walk-in cooler, his nervous deference from the wine incident replaced by something considerably colder. "You gave him your notebook," Gary said, blocking the cooler's narrow doorway, his breath visible in the cold air between them. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Councilman Cole's lawyers are already building a case against this restaurant. If Marchetti uses whatever's in those notes against him, it's going to come back on this building, and it's going to come back on you specifically because everyone already knows you're the one who handed it over." "I documented violations that put people at risk," Rachel said, backing up a step despite herself, the cold of the cooler biting through her uniform. "I didn't create the problem. I just wrote down what you ignored." "Doesn't matter what's true," Gary said. "Matters what Cole's people decide to say happened. You should have kept your head down like I told you." He stepped closer, hand closing hard around her arm, and that was the exact moment the cooler door swung open behind him, Dario filling the doorway with 2 of Vincent's other security staff crowding the hallway beyond. "Mr. Voss," Dario said, voice flat. "Mr. Marchetti would like a word." "Now." Gary released her arm and stumbled back, his earlier menace collapsing into something considerably more frightened, and Rachel stood in the cooler afterward, pulse hammering, watching him being walked toward Vincent's office without another word. It would have been a clean enough confrontation to end the threat there, if Councilman Cole hadn't decided within the week that quiet pressure wasn't going to be enough anymore. The viral video dropped 9 days later, edited with surgical precision to make Rachel look like the instigator rather than the victim. Clips trimmed to remove Madison's deliberate trip entirely, captions added claiming Rachel had attacked Madison's table after a simple accident, the footage racking up hundreds of thousands of views within hours, fueled by an aggressive promotional push that bore Councilman Cole's fingerprints all over it even before anyone confirmed his involvement directly. Rachel learned about it from Theo, who showed her his phone with visible dread, the comments section already filling with strangers who'd never set foot in Marchetti's dining room confidently declaring she should be fired, should be sued, should learn to control herself around normal customers. "This isn't what happened," Rachel said, scrolling through the edited clip with mounting horror. They cut the part where she threw it. They made it look like I did something. I know, Theo said. Everyone who was actually there knows. Doesn't matter to a million strangers who weren't. Vincent's response came fast and decisive, releasing the restaurant's full unedited security footage to 3 local news outlets within hours. The complete sequence showing Madison's deliberate trip, the staged laughter, the calculated nature of the entire incident laid bare for anyone willing to actually watch it. The truth spread, but considerably slower than the lie had. The way truth always seems to move slower than something designed specifically to provoke outrage. It should have ended there. Instead, 2 days later, Rachel received a call from a number she didn't recognize. A man's voice, cold and unfamiliar, identifying himself only as someone representing Councilman Cole's office. You should reconsider whatever you think you're doing, the voice said. The councilman has significant influence over restaurant licensing in this city. He has even more influence over your immigration status, given your work visa situation, which I understand expires in 11 months. It would be unfortunate if complications arose during renewal because someone decided you'd been a difficult employee with documented behavioral incidents. Rachel's blood went cold. That's not how visa renewals work. You can't manufacture. Bureaucracies can be remarkably slow to process paperwork for people who've made enemies of the wrong officials, the voice said. Think carefully about whether this is a fight you actually want, Miss Lynn. There's still time to make this disappear quietly for everyone involved. She told Vincent that same night, finding him in his office reviewing the same threatening pattern in 3 different forms. Gary Voss's continued silence despite mounting evidence, a sudden health inspector visit scheduled with suspicious speed, and now direct intimidation aimed specifically at Rachel's immigration status. This isn't about the restaurant license anymore, Vincent said, his composure carved from something colder than she'd seen from him yet. He's threatening your ability to stay in this country because you won't disappear quietly. That's not politics. That's a direct attack. What do we do? Rachel said, fear and fury tangling together in her chest. You don't have to do anything, Vincent said. I'll handle Cole directly. You shouldn't have to be in the middle of this. Rachel felt something sharpen in her chest, the same instinct that had made her refuse Vincent's offer to smooth things over days earlier. No, she said. I'm done being something that happens to other people in this story. He threatened me directly. I want to answer that directly, not from behind you. Rachel. I've spent 2 years being invisible in rooms exactly like this one, Rachel said. I am not going to start being protected into invisibility now the second things actually matter. If Cole wants to threaten me, I want him to understand exactly who he's threatening. Vincent studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his careful composure. Not relief exactly, but a kind of respect he hadn't fully extended to anyone since Sophia. Then we do this together, he said. But we do it carefully. Cole's dangerous precisely because he's reckless right now, and reckless men do considerably more damage than calculating ones. The next morning, before either of them could finalize a plan, the restaurant's general manager's office sat conspicuously empty. Gary Voss had vanished overnight, taking with him every remaining file on the health and safety violations, the only physical backup copy of Rachel's notebook still safely in Vincent's possession, but the absence itself sending an unmistakable message. He's run to Cole directly, Dario reported, grim-faced. We have confirmation he's been feeding the councilman information about this operation for at least 6 months. Probably longer. Vincent's expression went very still. How much does he actually know? Enough, Dario said, to make tonight considerably more dangerous than yesterday was. Rachel didn't wait for Vincent to fully process Gary's betrayal before she started working the problem the only way she knew how, methodically, precisely, the same patient documentation that had quietly recorded 2 years of violations now turned fully toward exposing exactly how deep the conspiracy actually ran. I need everything Gary's had access to since this started, she said, pulling out a second, smaller notebook she'd never shown anyone. A private log of every interaction with Gary over the past 2 weeks, dates and exact phrasing of his warnings recorded with the same instinct that had once protected her against safety violations now turned toward protecting against him. If he's been feeding Cole information, there's a pattern in the timing. There always is. Vincent listed out every decision Gary had been involved in over the past month, And Rachel cross-referenced it against the timeline of Cole's escalating moves. The sudden health inspection, the viral video's suspiciously professional editing, the timing of the intimidating call to her phone just 2 days after she'd handed over her original notebook. The pattern emerged within the hour. Every major escalation had occurred within a day of Gary attending a private meeting with Cole's chief aide. Meetings logged in the restaurant's own scheduling software under vague descriptions Gary had clearly hoped nobody would scrutinize closely. "He's not just covering for problems," Rachel said. "He's been actively feeding Cole the ammunition this entire time. Probably for money or protection from something else entirely." Vincent's fury, watching months of quiet betrayal resolve into certainty, was cold and absolute. "He's worked for me for 4 years," he said. "I never once thought to verify whether his loyalty had a price." "Nobody checks the people they've stopped questioning," Rachel said. "I learned that the hard way working under him for 2 years without anyone questioning whether I might actually notice something useful." It was Rachel, cross-referencing the inspection schedule against weather reports and delivery logs out of sheer habitual thoroughness, who noticed the detail that mattered most. The city's emergency response system showed an unscheduled gas line inspection request filed for Marchetti's building that same week, submitted under Gary's now-suspended credentials, timed to coincide precisely with a dinner reservation Vincent had personally confirmed for a meeting with 3 rival captains testing his territory. "This isn't an inspection," Rachel said, staring at the filing with mounting alarm. "Someone's planning to use a gas line malfunction as cover for something during that meeting. Vincent, they're not just trying to destroy your license anymore. They're setting up an excuse to have people in this building when something happens to you specifically." Vincent's expression went very still. "You're certain? The filing requests access to the basement utility room during the exact hour of your meeting," Rachel said. "No legitimate inspection needs that specific a window. This is cover for someone to get into this building without raising alarms." Vincent moved fast, canceling the dinner meeting under a plausible excuse, rerouting his security to monitor the basement access point instead of the dining room, the entire trap rendered useless before it could ever spring. When 2 unfamiliar men arrived that evening claiming to be city gas inspectors, Dario's team intercepted them at the basement door, finding tools considerably more suited to sabotage than inspection, and a brief, tense confrontation that ended with both men in custody before they reached anything that mattered. It was Rachel, not Vincent, who had seen the danger first. Not through force, not through strategy Vincent had planned himself, but through the same patient, overlooked attentiveness that had quietly documented violations nobody else bothered tracking for 2 straight years. "You saved this entire operation," Vincent said, once the would-be saboteurs had been removed and questioned, his voice carrying a weight that had nothing to do with gratitude alone. "Cole was going to use a fake gas leak to get armed men into this building during my own meeting, and I would have walked directly into it without you." "I just did the math," Rachel said. "I've been doing math nobody bothered checking for 2 years. This time someone finally needed me too." For the first time in 15 years, the man who had spent his entire adult life trying to protect everyone around him had just been protected in return. Not because he'd asked for it, but because the woman everyone in this city had decided was simply furniture in his dining room had refused to stop paying attention. The sabotage attempt forced Vincent's hand entirely, and the response that followed moved fast enough that Councilman Cole never had the chance to manufacture a second narrative before the first one collapsed completely. Vincent released everything. The gas inspection filing traced directly to Gary Voss's credentials, the recorded threatening call Rachel had saved in full, the timeline connecting Cole's office to months of escalating retaliation against a restaurant whose only real offense had been refusing to bend to political pressure over a financial dispute that, once independent auditors finally examined it, revealed Cole's own conflicts of interest considerably more clearly than anything Marchetti's books contained. The story broke across every local outlet within a day, the same journalists who'd run Madison's edited viral video now scrambling to cover an entirely different scandal. A sitting councilman who'd allegedly orchestrated a public humiliation, a smear campaign, immigration intimidation, and finally attempted sabotage against a private business, all stemming from a financial dispute he'd never disclosed to the public in the first place. "He's going to try to spin this," Vincent told Rachel the morning the story broke wide. "Men like Cole always have a second story ready. We need to make sure the truth outpaces it." "Then let me tell it," Rachel said. Not through your lawyers. Not through a press release. Let me actually say what happened on the record in my own words. Vincent hesitated. If you do this publicly, there's no taking it back. He'll come after you directly, harder than before. He already came after me directly, Rachel said. I'd rather meet that head-on than hide behind everyone else fighting it for me. Her testimony, delivered calmly to a city ethics committee 3 days later, detailed everything. The wine, the edited video, the threatening call about her visa status. The gas line filing meant to provide cover for an attack on Vincent's life. She spoke without theatrics, without performed outrage, the same steady, documented precision that had once filled a spiral notebook nobody thought mattered. And the committee chamber went as silent listening to her as Marchetti's dining room had gone silent the night the wine first hit her uniform. Councilman Cole's career collapsed within the month. The ethics investigation expanding rapidly once Rachel's testimony gave investigators a clear timeline to follow. Madison, stripped of the protection her father's influence had once guaranteed her, faced considerably more public consequence for the original incident than she'd ever anticipated when she dumped that first glass of wine for entertainment. Some people think she got off easy, Theo said, watching coverage of Madison's tearful court-mandated public apology, delivered fittingly in the same dining room where she'd first humiliated Rachel, cameras present this time by legal requirement rather than her own choosing. Some people are probably right, Rachel said. I could have pushed for considerably worse. I decided the apology mattered more than watching her suffer for it. Why? Vincent asked, finding her afterward in the quiet of the closed dining room. Because if I let this turn into pure revenge, Rachel said, I become exactly what people already assumed I'd be the second I started fighting back. I'd rather be the reason this story gets remembered as justice instead of cruelty answering cruelty. It was the moment Vincent's careful, guarded admiration for her finally tipped into something he could no longer pretend was only respect for her courage alone. You could have let me handle all of this from the shadows, he said. Instead you stood in front of every camera that wanted to destroy you and made them tell the truth instead. You gave me the chance to choose that, Rachel said. I think that's worth considerably more than being protected from the choice entirely. I've spent 15 years protecting people by keeping them out of danger, Vincent said quietly. I think you might be teaching me a different way to do it. Maybe, Rachel said. Or maybe I just finally found someone willing to let me protect myself. He kissed her there in the quiet, empty dining room where the entire story had begun. The chandelier light dimmed now to its evening setting, rain ticking softly against the windows facing Fulton Square. 2 months later, Marchetti's reopened its dining room under new management. Rachel herself now serving as the restaurant's operations director, a title that came with considerably more authority than anyone, including Rachel, had fully anticipated the night a glass of wine soaked through her uniform. She'd redesigned the health and safety protocols from the ground up. Every violation she'd once documented in secret now addressed publicly, posted prominently enough that no future Gary Voss could quietly bury a problem again. She'd also, with Vincent's full backing, started a small scholarship program for culinary students who didn't fit the narrow mold most kitchens still insisted on. The first recipient, a 19-year-old line cook named Priya, who reminded Rachel, more than she ever said out loud, of exactly who she'd been before this entire story began. Tonight's gathering wasn't a gala exactly, just a quiet dinner service reopening the restaurant to the public after months of renovation and scandal. But the dining room filled anyway with regulars, staff, and a scattering of journalists who'd covered the Cole story from beginning to end. The waitress who took down a sitting councilman, murmured one of the journalists near the bar, careful now in a way few people had ever bothered being around her before. I'd be lying if I said that doesn't make this restaurant considerably more interesting to write about. Good, Vincent said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. Theo found her near the kitchen pass, beaming, having been promoted to floor manager in the restructuring that followed Gary's departure. Half the staff wants to know if you're teaching a training session on documentation, he said. Apparently everyone's suddenly very interested in writing things down. Tell them Tuesday, Rachel said, though they both already knew she'd already drafted the materials weeks ago. Vincent found her near the front window overlooking Fulton Square, the same square where, 15 years earlier, his sister had once worked a dining room not unlike this one. He pressed something small into her hand, not a ring, not yet, but a recipe card, the handwriting clearly not Rachel's grandmother's. It's Sophia's, he said. Her handwriting. I kept a box of her things after she passed and never had the courage to go through it properly until recently. There's a dumpling recipe in there that looks remarkably similar to the one you've been trying to perfect for years. I thought maybe the two of you might finally crack it together in whatever way that's possible now. Rachel turned the card over in her hands, the careful, looping handwriting of a woman she'd never met but somehow felt she understood completely. I think I'd like that, she said quietly. Comparing notes with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be underestimated in a room like this one. She would have liked you, Vincent said. She always respected the quiet ones. Said they noticed everything everyone else was too loud to catch. The quiet ones are usually holding everything together, Rachel said. Nobody just bothers checking until something breaks. Then let's make sure the city finally checks, Vincent said and kissed her there in front of the same window overlooking the square, in front of staff and journalists and regulars recalculating, in real time, exactly how much they'd underestimated the woman who used to absorb every cruelty in this dining room without anyone bothering to learn her name. An older regular near the bar who'd been dining at Marchetti's since it first opened, raised his glass and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "They underestimated the wrong waitress." Got a quiet laugh. It also happened to be true. Later, as the evening wound down, Madison Cole's name came up once more in a quiet conversation between Vincent and Dario, not about consequence already delivered, but about whether her father's political network extended further than the ethics investigation had managed to expose. It was a loose thread neither of them mentioned to the room, tucked carefully away for a season when Fulton Square's fragile new balance would inevitably need defending again. Rachel Lynn had spent 2 years being told in 100 small, cumulative cruelties, that she was furniture in rooms built for people who'd never bother learning her name. She understood now, standing in a dining room full of people who finally, completely saw her, that she had never actually been furniture at all. She had only ever been unseen. And the quietest people in any room are very often the ones holding everything together, long before anyone bothers to notice. If this story kept you holding your breath, you know what to do. Hit like, subscribe for more, and if you think Fulton Square has more secrets left to expose, you're probably right. Drop a comment. Do you think Madison's apology was enough, or should she have faced more?